Welcome everyone. Hopefully folks are making their way back. Let me just make sure I can invite Candace back into the main Google Hangout here. Yes, exit your own Hangout rooms. Exit the old Hangout rooms and come on back here. It would be great. I don't think it would be great if other folks could email me and join me in the main room, and we could have a little discussion with those of you to be able to report on how your conversations went. Let me just email some things out. Hold on 1 second. We'll get all this working. Hopefully people had good conversations. If anybody wants to come join me to report out, if you can enter that link and join the main Google Hangout, that would be great. Let me try to get my crew back here. Well, it was pretty exciting to see the notes and conversations that were developing there. It seemed like there were some very strong groups in thinking about impact and some very strong groups in thinking about the consequences of our research. And there was a group that went for a little while in methods, and then those folks kind of disappeared. It would be great to have a few folks who could join the main Google Hangout. Oh, it looks like Elena's here. That's great. Hi, Elena. Can you unmute yourself so we can hear you?
Sure.
A little while. But now you gotta close the sound on the other one.
I've closed mine. Candace, have you closed yours? There's a little bit of delay between them.
So Neil and Candace, just make sure that you have your sound off for the other background one, and then we're okay. But I think I can mute Candace and that fixes it. Good, great. There's still a little feedback from somewhere, but it looks like we almost have it all sorted out. Elena, can you give us a reporting back on how your group went?
Sure. So I was in the group where you're thinking about the, characterizing contributions. We focused on what kind of impacts we want our conference to be able to provide in 10 or 20 years. By the way, it just suddenly got very noisy in this room. Are you still able to hear me? Okay, I'll go forward. Okay, so hey guys, 1 second. I'm sorry. We don't have private. Thank you. Okay, so essentially we focused on how in 10 years it'd be really great if we could write a book that had, that everyone should read, right? And to write a book, it needs to be coherent. It's not just kind of a collection of chapters. And to be coherent, we need to replicate and extend these common ideas like these theories and frameworks and reusable artifacts, like systems that people can continue to build on, so that we are changing the status quo. That MOOCs or corporate training or large classes at universities actually look different as a result of the papers that are being published now. So that's what we hope. That's what we want people to focus on.
That's great. Did you guys talk about what would be sort of intermediary markers in year 2, 5, and 7 that would give us some kind of sense that we had both built a body of theory and evidence that was worth writing a book about, and then also, saw evidence of changing practice. What would some of the intermediary pieces look like?
The intermediate pieces we talked about were creating resources for newcomers that are also for the community as a whole, that say, hey, if you're going to write a methodology paper, here are the things that you should be aware of, right? If you're going to write a systems paper, here's our expectations about your evaluation, how-to videos on experimental methods, that kind of thing, so that there's kind of a common grounding. And also, let's see, there was some suggestion of kind of taking away the deadline kind of craze and just like, what is my least publishable unit, but more thinking about support for people to do great work and submit it when it's ready.
Is there something that the conference could do around deadlines to resolve that, or was that sort of like a problem in people's lives? Is that a problem sort of in people's individuals' lives, or a problem with kind of the system of how we get together and converse with one another?
Well, apparently the NSF has removed deadlines. I'm not aware of what that means. But also like VLDB, there are conferences that have multiple deadlines throughout the year, allowing people to submit when it's appropriate to submit. But I think that's a minor point. I think at least having a common set of papers and resources that people should be referring to when they kind of choose, hey, I'm going to be a systems paper, I'm going to be a methodology paper, that will help people ground their work in similar frameworks or theories that will lend coherence to the conference as a whole and help us build toward that, coherent book in 10 years.
Well, I think that, and Candace was really the one who introduced this idea, but one of the things we hope to offer with the conference this year were synthesis papers, or the opportunity to submit synthesis papers that seem like, one of the functions they could have is what you described, which is being kind of papers that you could send novices to that said, here is an overview statement of some things we know in the field. For those learning scientists who are trying to think about how computers and data might be helpful for the first time, here's an overview of sort of what machine learning is, how it might work, and how it might help you in your field. Here's an overview of what human-computer interaction researchers do and how they take a design approach to systems or something like that. Candace, do you want to add anything else here to what might be a sort of useful way of thinking about these? Make sure you unmute your mic before you share your thoughts.
I'm sorry, I was not tracking. I was trying to help people with the muting, unmuting effectively, but I think everyone's got that now. So
okay, good.
I don't have anything to share.
All right, that's fine. Good. Neil, do you want to report out on the methods group and what you all talked about there?
Yeah, sure. We were just actually talking about the open science framework and the open badges components. They were suggesting the open science framework suggests open data, pre-registered studies, and open materials. We began a conversation talking about what do open materials mean in the context of learning at scale, and clearly when psychologists are using paper and pencil type materials that are printable, that's easy to share. What if there are whole systems? What if we clearly don't want to alienate actually people like at Carnegie Learning or people that are running commercial systems, or even actually for that matter nonprofit systems that might actually be hard to understand. How does someone share those materials so that but the materials, why do we care about materials? We care about actually whether someone could possibly replicate a study. So materials seem like the hard one to share. We did spend some time, Jack Mazda was with us.
Why do we care about materials? We care about actually whether someone could
Del was also with us, and I'm just gonna mute actually I thought Susan, because I was hearing feedback. But then actually Jack Mazda was with us, and we were talking about actually pre-registered studies and what's good or bad about that, and how do we somehow give credit to that movement. Those were the topics.
I mean, in your small group, was there consensus about most of those kinds of points and directions, or did you talk about people who might have objections to those kinds of? I mean, it sounds like you had, with the materials piece, there was a sense of, that there might be certain people who are coming from perspectives where it's kind of hard to share proprietary materials or share things that are harder to share to replicate and so forth. But to what extent was the consensus in your group that there might be sort of like some set of right answers to share people versus, was this, versus like, here are a set of options that we might offer to people that could improve their research, but there's probably lots of ways of doing this.
So we certainly didn't come to a consensus on the open materials thing. That seems harder to understand. But even when we got to actually something like pre-registered studies, so Jack Mostow was questioning, well, hey, we already have the notion that you can just I see Ken has actually made a comment here about actually being able to hear or not hear. And so, but there wasn't really consensus. Like Jack was saying, hey, like traditionally, you just write down this was a post hoc analysis, and that's been good enough. And why should we change that? And so we actually started talking about even the more radical elements of some of these journals that have been actually wanting to pre-register and accept papers before the study was run. And should Learning at Scale be thinking about such a thing where you say this is the planned study, and these journals have been like, we're going to publish if the study looks like a good idea, then maybe we should do something like that.
Yeah, I want to chime in here in that conversation, because one of the things that we had suggested is having a particular kind of paper submission for exactly that. That wouldn't be sort of a type of work in process paper that would be essentially proposing the study that you're going to do, laying out everything that you would have done in a pre-registration process, and having that be counted as a submission.
I love that idea.
Yeah, say more, Ken.
Well, I think, we'd want to do it kind of incrementally to test the waters, but I think I guess what I tried to put in here is that it doesn't feel like we have enough incentives at the moment for the extra work that open science requires. Or maybe it's just that not enough people know about it, but it feels like it's more than that. And, and if we sort of honored it by saying, we'll review your methods and, give you a work in progress or a work to be kind of slot, right? At that stage, that's pretty cool. I think that would be a way for the conference to incent that openness. Yeah, I guess that's only the pre-registered part, right? It's not the other two.
Yeah. It seems like one thing that might require is having a governing body for that process that existed longer than 1 year. Because it, it seems like you'd want to, if a study's going to take 1.5 years to run or something like that, then you might say you basically want one program committee to sort of accept a paper under the methods and then promise that what is probably a subsequent program committee is willing to, accept the paper afterwards. So journals which offer sort of longer deadline things, but maybe that's the kind of thing that, maybe there should be a special subcommittee of the program committee that does nothing but sort of handle this track and agrees to do it for 3 years or something like that. So that there's sort of a longer arc of things, and we just reserve some fraction of the program space for being able to do that. I mean, that's something that Candace and I could talk to the steering committee about starting something like that, where we add like an extra sort of January deadline or February deadline or something like that, or of pre-registrations that the steering committee sort of forces the next program committee to accept. That would be one way of including that, while accounting for the fact that a 1 year cycle is probably too short for a pre-registered study, for that whole pre-registration process to run under. That's kind of a cool idea. Are there folks who are in either the first or second groups who could record it out? Erica, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the conversation that you had within your theory group, or if someone can talk about the Asking Great Questions group.
Sure, I can talk about my theory group was very small. There was just 2 of us, and then
small is terrific. Small is beautiful.
Small. So we had some conversation there, and then I popped in actually to a couple other groups, which was also fun. So the person that I was with, his name is not here anymore, Sanuk. But we started off the conversation talking about neuroscience and how studies in stress affect how people learn online, and he had more experience there. But I then kind of shifted gears over to the different types of learning theories that a lot of research has focused on now. So there's a lot of goal theories that pertain to how learners learn. There's mastery and performance, and understanding how people the extrinsic and intrinsic influences on their learning. There's social interdependence theory. There's motivation theories that explore how those affect online learners. And so I think that understanding how all these different abundances of theories work together is prime in creating future research, and then being able to bring in especially the social aspect of it for learners is crucial, because I think that online learning can sometimes put people into silos, and I think that understanding how giving instructors or program designers more of a means of showing how to implement these more social aspects is important. So like I mentioned earlier, future research would be strengthened by compiling all of these existing theories, and also showing how we can measure how these theories do affect students, how students learn, and then how they are also retained in programs.
That's great. Good. Is there somebody who is in group 1 who can, because I think that might have built on that, sort of what constitutes asking great questions? What are distinctively great questions in the field of learning at scale?
That's supposed to be me, Ken here.
Hi, Ken.
Hi. I don't know, my video doesn't seem to be working. But if you're in the notes document, then you might see some of the things we talked about there. It certainly was a hard topic to get going on, but we did eventually get into some pretty interesting, vigorous discussion. We talked about some broad criteria like science contributions versus engineering contributions, things that are interesting, things that are important. Of course, I think what will continue to be a long-standing conversation for us is how to weight learning and learning science research, and how to weight scale, whether are both necessary, is one enough if there's some of the other, and so forth. I guess one of the particularly interesting points, to skip ahead in the notes a bit, Susan brought up some recent a conference in DC bringing together cognitive scientists and discipline-based education researchers, which I'm noticing that phrase might not be in here in our notes, but 2 representatives of those camps are Mark McDaniel, who's a cognitive scientist. I think it's supposed to be Nick Daniel, and Jose Mestra, who's a discipline-based education researcher in physics. And we got excited about that idea and about sort of pitching some kind of notion of discipline-based cognitive science education research at scale, or a slightly shorter version, discipline-based learning science research at scale. And perhaps even asking those 2 to do a kind of paired keynote, if you guys are looking for keynote participant suggestions.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the general chair has decided yet, Claudia, so we can forward any suggestions that the community has. Ken,
Yeah.
did you?
We don't get to, it's not my and Justin's purview to pick the keynotes. So that's Claudia's purview, but
Okay.
but she's certainly open to suggestions. So we will send that great suggestion to her.
There was also some suggestion that, you know, maybe we should fold the social psychology thing into all that, but maybe also some thought that, especially if we're pairing people across these different sort of camps together, that a two-way thing's hard enough, maybe a three-way thing. But that also led to, you know, what about some of the social psych researchers who have been collaborating with technology folks to do at scale social psych research? And, you know,
I was going to actually ask that in terms of maybe it should be a three-way combination with the discipline-based researcher, the cognitive scientist, and then the social scientist. You know, we could have like a little panel keynote like that.
Yeah, well, a panel might be another way to do that, right? We'll leave that there. I guess there's some, then Ito made a nice, cool overlapping diagram to emphasize some of the different dimensions of good question that we thought was important. And then there was an interesting discussion we had about the apparent fact that achievement gaps are not shrinking, that we're in fact probably seeing greater separation than we have before. And it's not clear that our online courses are helping. They might even be hurting. But, you know, is it possible to think about ways that we could encourage use of online course data to help understand what are the causal factors in gap issues, to help solve the problem? Bev brought up some interesting points about segregation and desegregation efforts, and there was a general, I think, good discussion about these very important issues, and how maybe we could encourage more stuff in that realm at the conference.
I'd be interested, Ken, in the small group that you're in. You know, you brought up the sort of the idea that how much learning, how much scale, how much of both seems to be like something that might be a perennial issue for this community. But in the sort of the short conversation that you all had, was there some point of consensus, like just among the whoever happened to be there at that time? Was there some sense like, oh, maybe this is actually a pretty good way of thinking about it?
Well, let me throw this out here and people can disagree, but I kind of have a sense that the computer scientists are quite willing to see scale without learning science, and the learning scientists are quite willing to see learning science without scale.
Yeah, so if it falls sort of within your domain, then that seems like it's legitimate, but it falls in someone else's domain and doesn't cross over to yours, then that seems illegitimate.
Well, I don't know if, I guess my particular view is more inclusive, but I think, you know, relevance to scale or potential impact on learning science, as well as the other thing, would be another way to frame that, if you see what I mean. Like, you can't ignore the other thing, but you don't have to nail it.
Good. Yeah. So I'm trying to think about like what the gymnastics equivalent of that is, or something like that. There's got to be some commitment. There's got to be some commitment to both, but we expect people to specialize or sort of deliver more on one or on the other.
There's the artistic score and the technical score.
Exactly. Right. And you can't get a zero. You can't get a zero on both, but you don't have to.
But
you don't have to ace it.
Super
in
high.
the scoring rubric, should we explicitly have people give a score on both, so that then we can quickly see which papers seem to be stronger on both? Hello?
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion about, and I'm trying to look back at what we had. There's sort of, I mean, relevance to learning at scale. I mean, maybe that needs to be broken up into two sections then, of, like, it's not really relevance. It's sort of like, attentive to theories of learning, contributing to theories of learning, attentive to implications for scale, contributing to implications for scale. Maybe that relevance question should be broken up kind of into two pieces as a way of highlighting those two dimensions. That would be one simple, concrete way of changing the scoring rubric that might encourage us to think more carefully about how people do those two things.
Right.
I mean, I think too, I would rather see a super interesting, maybe unusual paper, like it's kind of a third dimension, right? Maybe that is mediocre on the other two, but is really, thought-provoking and driving us forward. So yeah, I don't know. It feels like we should have guidance in the reviewing structure and have people comment on these dimensions and maybe even rate them. But I don't think we can let the process figure out how to ultimately weight.
Yeah, I guess another thing we could do is just leave it as a single score, the relevance to learning at scale. But in explaining people how to score that, say to give higher scores to things that both meet learning and at scale. And I mean, that's the relevance question. Or if it is relevant on just one or the other, then it's not going to be a 5. Novelty, there's a separate score for novelty, which I think is where what you're interested in, Ken, would get picked up. So you could get like a 3 on relevance and it could be super, and you get a 5 on novelty because it's a super novel learning science thing, but it doesn't really have anything to do with scale, or the other way around. And then we always ask people to explain their score in the comment section. So if you gave something a 3 on relevance, you could say it was really strong on the at scale and wasn't so strong on anything about learning, or it was really strong on learning but wasn't so strong on anything at scale. I don't know.
Yeah, another way to think about it is sort of to what extent is interdisciplinarity an explicit virtue of the conference? To what extent, Scott in the chat room for the on Hangout sort of mentioned that Kai offers these sort of separate tracks that you can sign up for. And it seems like one virtue of that approach is you can say, hey, please evaluate my contribution along these particular dimensions. So that seems worthwhile. However, it also seems like it would have the possibility of, to what extent do we want people, to what extent do we think the very best work at this conference should just be really good learning work or really good, work in scale or computer science or something like that? And to what extent do we want to signal for people that the very best contributions will be sort of explicitly interdisciplinary in some dimension? To what extent should that be a particular area of focus or not? I just pose that as it seems like one of the dilemmas, another way of framing this dilemma we've been talking about.
We explicitly talked about tracks and the fact that that's something Kai does and whether or not we want to. I think when we talked about making an impact and the contributions, it seemed very important to be able for the authors to be able to say, hey, I want to be evaluated as a system, right? I don't have pre and post tests. I haven't done careful statistics on like learning specifically, but I belong here. That seems very appropriate. At the same time, if it goes so much so that we have 2 parallel tracks, literally, like we essentially have a conference where there's a bunch of learning people talking to each other and a bunch of scale people talking to each other, and they could be perhaps doing that better at other conferences. And then the purpose of the Learning at Scale conference, maybe it's just kind of yet another place to publish, but it's not forcing people to think about the unique opportunity of teaching thousands or millions of people at once.
Yeah, that's right. But it seems like the virtue in there of being evaluated on the things that you feel like you're strongest of does seem like that. It almost seems like it might be another thing other than tracking might be to ask people to signal sort of what they were trying to accomplish, something like, the tracking, not to like actually have things be on different tracks, but tracking as a signaling mechanism for saying like what it is that you were trying to accomplish. That seems like an interesting thing to play around with. Well, we've gotten towards the end of the afternoon here, and I think these are some super useful ideas, and it sounds like there's also some like very specific things that Candace and I can take away from these conversations and from these notes, and be able to possibly make some changes to the program committee for this year, or we can at least make some recommendations for next year. Maybe there's some other things that we can think about playing around with the review rubric and so forth. Did anybody have any other things that they felt like were sort of really interesting or points or perspectives that were mentioned in their groups that they didn't have a chance to share? Is there anything else that seems like it's really were topics that didn't get covered across our different conversations that would be worth bringing up or referencing?
I think the document that we produced is great, and I hope it's okay that I can share it with other people at Berkeley Institute of Design who are interested in this conference.
I hope people share it really widely. Yeah, and also if any, to the extent that anyone, I mean, obviously people are enormously busy, to the extent that anyone has any additional time to go back to those executive summaries and just try to give people some either, some big buckets of those ideas or some other kinds of things that might, any other way that we can make that document more helpful for people to see the kinds of things that we're talking about. We definitely have, people should feel free to share it widely. Maybe I'll try to put some notes at the top of it to give a little context for it. And B, there were definitely plenty of people who couldn't come to this event who asked to have a chance to see the notes. So this can be sort of one record of our conversation. The other thing that Candace and I can try to do as a way of following up and extending things too is if the next time we get together, we can think of some specific action items that come out of this, some specific things that we could acknowledge, both in terms of either recommend, some things like the sort of contribution type might be a recommendation that we would have to make for sort of future program committee submissions, but there might also be some things that we could do in terms of the reviewing rubric or starting some other programs right now. Well, thanks everyone for participating in the conversation. It's great to have you all take some time, and obviously great to connect with people and hear the kinds of things that they're interested in and working on. Appreciate you taking the time to carve out. Some of what conversations like this do is just sort of surface existing issues that are there, but if we can continue to help both add clarity to those and to think about concrete things that we can do to move interesting things forward, then that's great. Candace, do you have any other final thoughts on as we get ready to close up?
Nope, just that was really fun.
Good.
And the other piece is that you will be receiving an email shortly about the December 14th actual program committee meeting. And as you know, this year we're making it an option to participate remotely as opposed to participating in person. And so we're going to try to use Slack so that everyone can just keep the Slack channel open on their computer during the 8-hour meeting. And then we're going to have someone who's queuing up the papers so that, and then we're going to ask people to join in the Google Hangout at the point when they need to be reviewing papers. So we're hoping that will make it both more fun for the people that are remote and also easier to attend to the parts of the conversation that you really need to attend to. But we need to then get everyone in the Slack room well in advance of the meeting so that we can make sure that logistically our plan will work. So anyway, you'll get that email shortly.
All right, wonderful, everyone. I'm so glad that people could participate in the Hangout. For those of you who use it for the first time, thanks for jumping in and playing around. I hope everyone has a great afternoon or morning or whatever other time it is. And we will see many of you soon as we start making our way towards the December program committee meeting. So thanks so much for participating, and have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks.